Franci, ¿me puedes bajar un poquitito?
Hey, this is Cadillac, and welcome back to the CRP. We're talking about the NBA and China. Some crazy stuff has gone on over the last 24 hours. I don't know if I'd call it a tweet storm, but it certainly shows the depth of problems that we are getting ourselves into with China through this trade war and everything else that's going on. Turkey, Syria. We're going to talk about a few things. But first of all, hey, Miguel, how are you doing? Miguel Iterati, fight analyst.
Yeah, and I mean this NBA and China, and we're heading towards a fight. It looks like so. Might as well be the fight analyst here too.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to talk about fight world, we've almost sort of got to talk about where we're at with the U.S. and China now, and how that affects the entire world, and what the global economics are that are interplaying in this, and there's no way to become disentangled, as they say. So why don't you start by telling us what happened with the NBA in China, so we can start with that.
Okay, just to get into the details as quickly as possible, we've seen this play itself out over the last couple of days, and that is that Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey tweeted support for the Hong Kong protesters, and this has been going on for a little while now. The Hong Kong protesters are protesting laws that would allow extradition to mainland China, and that's been an ongoing and political issue for 70 years now, kind of thing. And Maury just like many other Americans and people worldwide, sort of just put out a support tweet. Now, China did not react well to that at all. Keep in mind, China has a very good relationship with the NBA. That the sport's very popular over there. In particular with Houston Rockets. That's the team that had Yao Ming. It was a Hall of Famer and a Chinese national. Obviously, 7'5". Everybody still remembers Yao Ming. So basically, the Rockets, felt a lot of pressure from China. The Rockets internally actually had discussions over possibly firing Morey, and Morey is probably a top 5 general manager in terms of ratings right around now. Always a mover, always a shaker. Houston's a top-notch team, mainly because of his abilities and stuff. So put it this way, before this happened, he was not on the hot seat. He wasn't about to get fired, or there wasn't that much of a worry for him or anything like that. But they actually had a discussion about getting rid of him, maybe to appease China and stuff. Now, it's gotten bigger than that, though, because I was reading here recently where a bunch of Chinese-owned companies that sponsor the NBA just dropped the NBA as sponsors overnight. About 15 big companies just came out in China. And
are you talking about they dropped the Houston Rockets, or they dropped
the entire NBA? Which is an.
Can you name any of those companies for us?
I'm looking them up right now so I don't garble them. Just one moment here. Dongfeng Motors. So like they're big sponsors. Vivo said it was pulling out. A maker of instant noodles and beverages, said it ended all NBA-linked marketing activities. I'm reading from Bloomberg. Luckin Coffee, a local rival to Starbucks, also suspended all cooperation with NBA's local events. Ctrip.com, international and online travel agent, said on its Weibo account, Weibo is the Chinese Facebook, that was removing all tickets and products related to the NBA from its website. So, yeah, overnight, see that, and this is, I think this is critical because, there are no circumstances or really few circumstances. There are no circumstances like this that would lead to like American companies pulling out of,
right.
Now there are certain circumstances, that American companies do pull out wholesale, but we look at other different things here. You know what I mean? This is a political issue with Hong Kong. I mean, it's pretty clear that America and Hong Kong have been together. I mean, what do you expect kind of thing? For them to take this action and to escalate it this way, this is going to affect millions of dollars. You know, there are NBA players who have played in China, you know, so there's money to be made there, shoes and those types of endorsements. They're affecting more than just the NBA players. They're now businesses and things that have been set up with this interplay. But again, the NBA is a huge sport in China, and their willingness to yank this, yeah, it goes beyond just the NBA and stuff, but it's being used as a tool here to make things, you know, escalate, basically.
So, okay, so just so that I'm getting this right, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding as a farmer, I farm hemp. I grew up on a farm. I live in a farm community. I'm surrounded by fields and crops right now that there's not a market for. The vast majority of farmers in the United States voted for Republicans. They wanted this trade war because they believed that this trade war would be able to force the Chinese to our will, because we have the largest economy in the world. And immediately what many people came to the conclusion of was, well, Pen doesn't care. There's over a bill. I mean, there's close to 2 billion Chinamen, and he does not care if 500,000 Chinamen starve to death over losing jobs from a U.S. economy, right? And they've been nation building in a completely different way than what the U.S. has for quite a while now. So talk to me a little bit about how China's nation building is different from how the U.S.'s nation building policies go. And I'm trying to do this to get back to why such a tiny thing like a tweet from some guy in the NBA could literally lead us to, I mean, without being overreactive, literally we could be in a massive war that could turn into a World War III scenario. Do you believe that?
Look, I think that the world is an extremely dangerous place, and that's, you know, definitely that the paths to there are more visible and accessible to me than the paths to, like, we're all going to be, like, you know, holding hands and skipping in the grass, you know, and that's what makes it very dangerous. The thing that worries me too here is, you know, the conflicts within our own country, you know, even the LGBTQ stuff, the, you know, the left and the right, you know, even the racist stuff and all those types of things, you know, those types of things are, you know, seem to be fracturing and keeping us divided, and that seems to be worsening, not getting better and stuff. And you mentioned 2 billion Chinese, and, you know, that's not you know, that's not really an exaggeration. They, you know, have much more of a mindset of less individuality, put it that way, you know. And you know, in many ways we think that that's wrong and that's bad, right? But you know, an analysis of it is we wouldn't be capable of the reaction of China and these Chinese companies, you know, in to retaliate, or whatever you want to call it, you know, reciprocity or whatever. We wouldn't be capable of doing that. You know, Microsoft might say, oh, you know, we do well in China, and, you know, we're not going to do that. And, you know, Facebook will have a meeting about it, and, you know, they'll do, you know, our companies are much more independent minded, and also not worried about a repercussion, so that they're not, you know, it's like, doesn't it seem weird that all, you know, with the ideas of totalitarianism and, you know, 1984 nowadays is more than 30 years ago, you know, but, oh, it didn't happen. Well, you know, look at this situation. Here's a situation where very fast, you know, China's ability to react on a country basis, pulling sponsors and stuff like that, they've escalated this thing in a major way. No guns, nothing. This is just on the business end and stuff. So, yeah, I think it's a weird situation, a weird spot that I'm sure Daryl Morey didn't realize was going to get into with this situation, with that tweet. But you're here now, and I do think that this type of thing, it would be dangerous to not back Daryl Morey at this point. You know what I mean? It's like freedom of expression. So what do we do? Or what would have happened if the Rockets had actually fired him for freedom of expression?
Okay, so getting back to the tweet, then all he did was expressed support for the protesters in Hong Kong and said, he sends his support. He may not even have actually recognized what the implications were as he did that. He probably did that as nothing more than somebody who believes in the American way, which is questionable these days as well. But if no matter what, I heard a soldier on a podcast today say, if you want the people of the United States to unite, let somebody attack us and see how fast the blue and the red become purple, right? So, it all smears back together. But here are the immediate implications that I'm seeing. Okay, so we have initially it was a trade agreement, and it doesn't matter politically who said what, who did and who didn't do what. Although it was a very cobnob way of going about it, nonetheless, the idea has been, well, China's been screwing us on trade for years, and we need to go out and we need to kick some ass, and we need to lay down the law and put our foot down. And we really can't do that, we found out, right? Because we don't have, although we have the power, I mean, we could probably go over there and annihilate them pretty quickly, realistically. I mean, we would suffer, but if we took our military over there at full force without nukes, we could probably decimate 80% of China's major infrastructure within a few months. But nobody wants that. And by the way,
though that impression is there, and maybe 10 years ago it was firmer, I'm not 100% sure that, China, the thing is
they're very secretive.
Right. And that's the thing, is that I'm not sure that they haven't been actively working these types of things for a long time. Here's the problem.
Hold on. We know they have. Okay.
Right.
So we know that they've been actively building their military over the last 5 to 10 years, and specifically the last 5. And the reason they've been doing this is because all of the fervor in the United States about, we need to make China pay their fair share. It's a bad deal for us. But here's the thing. I always go back to this example that I heard when I was probably in junior high school. And that was that Ma Bell went over and they strung lines and they strung telephone service all over China. And people thought they were crazy. And they said, these people are so poor they can't feed themselves. They starve to death. And Ma Bell said, well, they can afford to spend $1 on a phone. And that will completely change their infrastructure, which will change their economy, which will help them grow, which will give us a market. Richard Nixon was all part of this early on when he opened up China. I won't get into all that. But the point is that $1 is $1 billion there. Where a phone here back, when in what, 79 to 82 or whatever, was $12 or something. I don't know. And maybe you bought one, maybe you didn't. So China has always had buying power because they have people power, right? So take it from there, Miguel.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up Ma Bell, right? Because the interesting thing there is that they tried to do it right back to us with Huawei, right? They tried to set up a 5G network for our phones and this, that, and the other stuff. And there's a little bit of a, maybe karma or whatever the lack of, what comes around goes around kind of, whatever those theories embody, that may be a little bit of it. But what's interesting to me is, Huawei, again, is a company that is sitting there and like looking to the Chinese government to say, okay, what do we do? How do we react? What do we, and the same thing with these companies and sponsors that the NBA is losing. They're sitting there fearful and looking at the government and, looking for the cue. You know what I mean? It's like none of them you don't get, and now they're all marching to the exact same beat of the drum and stuff like that. And again, the freedom of speech, the types of things that we supposedly stand for, are not even, they're not even questioned. And if if they don't care about that, then we can't tell them, hey, you're crushing freedom of speech. You know what I mean? They don't care. In terms of the Uyghurs in the western part of their country. You're talking about Muslim people that just happen to be in the border of China. And what the Chinese did is they sent to every house a Han Chinese from the East. You have to host a Chinese person as part of the, changing over of these people in the way they want, right? One of the amazing things, there's good stuff on the internet about it, and obviously, but one of the amazing things that they've done here, and this speaks to the effects of the power of 2 billion people. You can move a person into every house in a city of 2 million people and just say, sit there and make sure that they're talking our language, not theirs, and et cetera, et cetera. Spies, basically. That's the power of a billion people, right? But on top of that, now, many of these adults are like, okay, here's your ticket. You get a ticket or whatever. And now all of a sudden it's like, hey, you're going to have to go to jail or a camp for re-education. And they sent so many Uyghurs to these camps that, and the way certain journalists tracked them down, I'd have to see if it was Vice, but it's that type of journalism that goes on with sending guys to the floor and do that type of stuff. But the way they figured this out and determined it is because all of a sudden, across all of the east of China, the cities of the Uyghurs and stuff, daycare centers started to pop up. And the reason they need a daycare center is to house, because these kids are not going home at night; they're there housed. Is to house all the kids whose mother and father are in the retraining camps. And I'm talking about, not your daycare center. We got 6 kids here, and a couple of more, 3 infants and stuff. I'm talking about 8-story buildings that look like, a casino or a hospital or a major building and housing. And now these came up across there, and hundreds of kids in there away from their parents as their parents are re-educated. Again, that's the power of 1 billion people. You can go and say, sometimes the buildings collapse, the standards and things. When they want to do things right, they can do things right. And they send 1 billion people and say, look, we need 40 new 8-story buildings in 3 months. Yeah, they can get it done,
Sure.
And that is a little bit of the problem here with the NBA, the NBA stuff. The Daryl Morey tweet, I looked it up. Daryl Morey literally was a graphic, and it says, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." That's it. Nothing else. Fight for freedom. And I think that
do you think he had any idea of the impact that tweet would have?
He does now, right?
Well, he does now, but I'm saying, do you think it was seriously, do you think it was an accident? I got a bug here. Sorry. Do you think that was an accident? Not an accident. Do you think it was a matter of he didn't think it through to realize how severe the ramifications would be?
Here's the thing: is obviously everything that's happened, he didn't want to happen, right? So now, if he wanted it to happen, then maybe he sent the tweet, to say, fuck China or whatever. I mean, I want to instigate stuff. So I think that's far from the case, right? But I think Daryl Morey, I don't know how many Twitter followers and that sort of stuff he has, but he is a public figure and he's a personality. So he should shouldn't be completely ignorant about the power of his words and the power of his words to be twisted and a whole bunch of stuff. An NBA general manager, one of his peers, recently in the last couple of years lost his job because I think his wife and a couple of family members had set up fake accounts to like troll players and stuff like that, and they tracked it down to his wife and stuff. So the social media thing, these guys have to be aware of, right? But do I think did he realize Daryl Morey must have been to China with with the team and this, that, and the other stuff, So, but do you realize?
I don't know that. How often does that go on? Is that do they like? Okay, so the NFL. I follow the NFL, but I'm not a basketball guy.
I think it's very similar. For example, the NFL has whatever they have as a schedule. And every once in a while,
they go to Europe once in a while.
Teams go to London or Mexico City.
Yeah.
But it's a special thing. I think it's very similar. The NBA teams go over there. Maybe they do preseason games over there. The thing is that the merchandising, this is what the NBA and the merchandising that they do in China is extremely lucrative. And that's gift money. Because 60 years ago, nobody was thinking, at some point, we're going to have Kobe Bryant T-shirts on every Chinaman, and it's going to be, X billions of dollars. But I think you're literally at that point that the sport is very captivating. They enjoy it. It's also exotic because they don't have a lot of, African American or, so black.
They don't have a lot of guys over 5 feet.
Yeah, exactly. So, and the height and the thing. So I think the NBA is in a special place in China where the NFL might not ever get to that spot, right? So I think that's circumstance and luck. But the amount of money they're making, the amount of money players with a name like Stephon Marbury is a good example. Marbury went over and played a few years over there. There are other examples where they can extend that. All that could come to a grinding halt. Import-export companies that were set up to move things, NBA merchandise over there and stuff like that. All that comes to a grinding halt. And, that's exactly what China wanted it to happen, That when they say, okay, if we come out on this is what's going to happen. Our companies, I don't even think they have to tell the companies, you're going to do this. I think everybody knows. The mentality there is much more of that hive mentality, whereas we think of an individualism. But here's an example where, you can take it or leave it, but it may be hurting us, I'll give you another example again from, the type of media like Vice and things that there's a lot of good journalism being done, or at least, for you to analyze and look at and stuff. And one of them was a trip to the Chinese border with North Korea. And one of the things that jumped out at me that you could just see that, no American, it's the same thing. Picture an American doing this to China. Picture an American doing this to Mexico as you look at a lesser or smaller country, south of you kind of thing. And you ask the common Chinese folks what they think about it, and they literally say, we're better than them. They're North Koreans. They're backwards. We're better than them. Picture me saying that about Mexico. Now Mexico's more advanced than North Korea, and there are other reasons and stuff. But the mindset is there. It's us and them, and we don't. If you look at our news and stuff, we're trying to get over us and them and have more of a mentality where anything goes and everybody's okay. If you are handicapped or of a certain race or color, and carry maybe stigmas or baggage or maybe wounds from history and things like that. Try to take all that into account as we move on to a greater, future kind of thing. Very little of the world thinks that way. And here's China defining themselves kind of as an adversary through moves like this. And, this is a very clear line of us and them. You know what I mean?
So let me ask you this, Miguel. Do you feel, because this is how I feel about it. I feel like we created the monster that we have now so that we could feed the monster that we are. We opened up markets with China and thought, oh, that's the greatest thing in the world. And we're going to sell all these people, we're going to feed them. The old saying, when we were kids, we were kids of the 70s and 80s. And so, we both graduated in the 80s. We both went through elementary and junior high in the 70s and 80s. And one of the things that we always heard is clean your plate. There are kids in China starving, right? Well, it's not that way anymore. And China, once they got a taste, they said, we like this and we want to keep doing this. The difference is they will not go against their government to get it. And we saw that in Tiananmen Square right after I graduated. And what was Tiananmen Square?
I believe it was 89.
Summer of 89, right? So, summer of 89. And, they ran over people with tanks on live TV and they didn't give a shit. They're like, yeah, they were disobeying and they got what they deserve. And that's what everybody's going to get. And who knows how many of those students, they're probably all dead if they're not still in jail. So I wonder what you think about this, because look, you've been away from the American dream, as it were, for 12 years now.
Yeah, about.
Okay, so what does that look like when you're not in the United States? What do you see the United States doing with China right now? What is your reaction and people around you? How do they react in Central America to what's going on with China? Do they look at it and go, that's what America gets for trying to imperialize the world? Do they say the Americans have the right idea? They're the candle in the darkness? Or is it, hey, let's take advantage of this the way the Americans have always taken advantage of it, and let's have capitalism here, and we'll sell stuff to China that they could have bought from America, but now we're going to sell it to them. It's got to be one of those three, right? Am I off?
No, I don't think you're. I think those are all absolute factors, but I think it really does go a lot more complicated than that. The bottom line is,
of course. I'm trying to kind of minimalize it, so we can kind of get it.
Here's the problem with, let's say this goes to an aggressive tension between the United States and China.
And by aggressive, you mean physically aggressive, as in troops on the ground war?
No. I mean aggressive, whereas we're no longer giving the rhetoric of that we're not at war with each other. War being financial and staying away right to the brink of physical war. But we're not playing around anymore where we're trying to be friends or where we're off the table, where that's at, where we're saying, look,
well,
Chinese are trying to take over the world and we're not going to have it.
Let me interrupt you and say that we are there. We're at the stare down now and we're waiting for somebody to blink.
Well, I think
that's where we're at.
I do think that, yes, I don't think it's declared, but I do think that long before, and it may, long before people are actually, putting troops on the ground, I think this fight becomes more of a financial fight. I think the tariffs and that stuff, that the pain has not been felt on a worldwide basis, and I think it all starts there. But if you get to the point where, this is why I believe that as an adversary, they're in a better position, because you take things into account like, we're better than them. Once you got everybody marching to that beat of a drum, that's quite a hefty adversary. So now you got to realize, I'm in Costa Rica. There are six like little mom and pop grocery stores within walking distance of my house that I can go to. And 3 of them are owned by Chinese families. And I believe that that's the case, that their diaspora is going to be very much something in their favor. They actually have people on the ground and stuff now. The language, this, that, and the other thing, it also makes them more accepted. They're also seen as sort of wealthy, sort of people who will take you for a buck and stuff, but sort of wealthy and stuff. So, they're in a decent position here. What does that mean? So what happens? For example, in exactly this fight with Hong Kong, okay, one of the things that Hong Kong did last century, through their attempts to survive, was they made solicitations to around the world to other countries so that other countries would recognize them as a country in the United Nations and that sort of stuff.
Correct.
And one of the things they did is philanthropy, right? So
yes,
there's a bridge here in Guanacaste that was built by Hong Kong. And that's the Bridge of Peace and stuff and this, that, and the other stuff. And that was built, 15, 20 years ago. Costa Rica used to recognize them as a country. Along comes China and
Hong Kong, not Hong Kong, China.
Hong Kong separate as being not the People's Democratic Republic of China or whatever, whatever China is, it's recognizing that they're a separate government right now.
Can you, hey Miguel, can you do a brief history of how Hong Kong laid out and what happened over the last 15 years so people understand that in case they don't?
Okay, super fast. When you go towards the end of World War II, China was being there was a sort of a small Chinese revolution type of thing where communism took over China. The democratic remnants of the opposition fled to Hong Kong and started their own government and have been there ever since. China considers Hong Kong a rogue province that they haven't gone to war yet because the U.S. backed them and stuff like that. And 70 years ago, they couldn't have taken Taiwan and maybe I believe I just mixed up my histories with Taiwan and Hong Kong, but
okay, you did, but you get the general idea. Okay,
all of the story
to footnote it then. If I'll wrap that.
Hong Kong was a province that was owned, I believe, by England, and we returned it to them in 1999 with the idea that they would have
they would have some kind of democracy, and they would have they would have allegiance to themselves.
Yes. So I did
from that we were hoping that Japan would be part of Hong Kong as well as Mongolia, etc., and that hasn't happened because China's communist dictatorship, starting with Chairman Mao and moving on to Xi and all that, has completely shut all of that down. So when the province came up in, is it 99? Is that right? When the province came up in 99 and the treaty was no longer enacted, then Hong Kong became a big player in the middle of really, I mean, I would consider Japan the West and of course, the United States and Europe, and I would consider India neutral, and I would consider China and Russia to be the East. And I know that oversimplifies things, but that kind of gives you a general bio of what's going on and why Hong Kong's so important. So carry on from there. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt your flow, but I thought that was important.
No, to get it right is absolutely important. I'm sorry I mixed it up. It's not my wheelhouse, but I do know enough. Hong Kong also has the same status as Macau, whereas Macau was returned to by Portugal, and that's a different place because that's a gambling capital, and there's different types of flows of money there. Hong Kong is viewed more as the democracy on the forward foot, so it becomes more of a symbol as well. But here's the problem is because Hong Kong was returned to them. It didn't just give it back to them. They put some rules around them. But why would China, not want to follow those rules forever? It's theirs. It's their province. Why all of this kowtowing to the West? Now it seems like they're much more capable of exerting their own will and showing. So they step up and do things like this. The NBA blow. Now,
so take me there, Miguel. Okay, from there, tell me how. Tell the audience how China has stepped up and said, we're going to exert our will and we're going to show you what real power is because we're going to buy our soybeans from Argentina. That's big. That's enormous. Where I live, I'm surrounded by it. And I see people I see farmers that are sweating it, and they were promised 27 billion. They've gotten less than a third of that so far in the bailout. How long do we bail farmers out? We're back in 1980 with John Cougar and Rain on the Scarecrow and Blood on the Plow, and watching people literally set at auctions in my home area and carry people's couches and their pictures on their walls that they bought out because they wanted to frame. And they literally sold every single thing they could because the banks foreclosed on farmers. So take it from there.
Yeah, the farm thing obviously is an economy onto itself, right? So
it is.
That's a major. You're talking about $27 billion. Most countries operate with less than that.
Let me tell you this: there is no economy without agriculture. Period.
So, but in the NBA, you would think is a frivolous thing, and
it's nothing. Why does that matter? Tell me why it matters. Walk me down that road.
Here's how we got to where we are, and why it's a serious escalation on the part of the Chinese, and it's a very serious affront to America. Should we want to take it that way, And I do. The problem is, I do think they meant it this way. So, the Houston Rockets are faced with, however the news comes. Some representative, somebody lets them know that the Chinese government has taken very poorly to Daryl Morey's, their general manager's tweet, and repercussions are coming, right?
Well, can we even go further than that and say
no.
anything that backs protesters in Hong Kong, in China, that shit doesn't fly? Oh, yeah, would you agree with that?
Yeah, you're gonna be in trouble. So now what happens here? The Houston Rockets could have done a situation where they fired the guy and said, "I'm sorry, China," right? And that would have absolutely been the wrong thing to do, I think. Especially when you talk about little things like the Constitution and freedom of speech and the things that we're supposed to stand for, right? So, to the credit of the Houston Rockets, and you want to hear something interesting? Lorenzo and what's Lorenzo Fertitta's the brother?
It slips me right now. Okay. Yeah, Lorenzo and Frank. Yeah. Frank Fertitta, yeah.
Well, there's a third brother, Tillman, and Tillman is the owner of the Rockets.
Okay.
Now, so you're talking about, a little bit of interesting things. So what happens is, for example, the Fertitta casinos in Vegas, you can't bet on the Rockets because there's that veneer of
because of the tie-in,
right, and stuff like that, So, but they're a powerful family. But to the credit of Tillman Fertitta, he didn't fire Daryl Morey. He said, "We stand by our general manager. He's actually the best in the business. Maybe he's lucky he's the best or a top 5 guy. If he sucked, maybe it would have been the opportunity to get rid of him, and then we would have had that." But here's the thing: is firing him might have limited the reaction from China, but they said, "No, we're not going to do anything. We stand by it, freedom of speech and his ability to express himself." So now China comes and escalates and takes out every NBA team sponsors, at a high level. And you're talking about, I'm not sure what a lot of that is, but appearances.
Half a billion?
Teams could go. It doesn't. Teams went to make appearances over there, and keep in mind, you're talking about a huge number of college kids that played college basketball that are not good enough for the NBA, but are still able to make a living playing basketball in overseas, China, Spain,
sure,
Russia. There are many leagues throughout, and these guys go over there. China was a preferred destination.
Yeah, I have friends who played in China.
Former NBA players going there. Situations where, the marketing, again, you're talking about clothing 2 billion people, sneakers, all that stuff. There's a lot of money that the Chinese just crushed, and there's no real, all we're doing, we're taking in that relationship the cash, we're giving them entertainment and the value of entertainment, but there's not a lot of I don't think, Walmart is carrying, Chinese basketball league jerseys.
Yeah. So okay. So I don't want to beat that to death because we get it. But here's the bigger picture, and let's talk about the bigger picture and what that really means to individual Americans, what that means to freedom of speech, what that means to freedom of the press, which is the same thing as freedom of speech, what that means to freedom and democracy in general. Now you live outside of the U.S. now. What differences can you tell me that you see between Costa Rican democracy and freedom versus American democracy and freedom? It just in a nutshell.
I think American. Here's the thing: is democracy is not a natural development in Costa Rica. It was bought here and sold as a positive advancement for the society and giving everybody a voice and all the bells and whistles. And I think in general, people at an educated level buy into that. Like it's good to be a democracy, you're preferred over a dictatorship and stuff like that.
Sure.
But I think at the essence of a lot of the discussions we've had offline too about it comes down to, we're talking about freedom of expression here. If the Rockets had fired this guy over what he said, doesn't that really go against everything in our Constitution and stuff? Now,
they could not have fired him. So that's the truth. But the NFL fired Kaepernick.
But that's a different podcast. We'll get into that one. But so here, they didn't fire him. So now the NBA is going to lose all kinds of business because China can continue to react. Now, there's not much that we can do to them, right? They're already, and most of the population that were fans of the NBA might not be as fanatic about it anymore because it's like, why'd they affront us? Why were they insulting? Why are they on Hong Kong's side? What did we do? Well, they're just basketball players. Whatever the
because they're going to be fed a specific agenda of what happened, right?
Yeah. I think
they don't have freedom of press. They don't have freedom of speech.
I think in this case, I don't think that the Chinese need to. I think they can tell their population that Road Province or all those protests in Hong Kong. Maybe they're not publicizing any of that, and then it'll just stay a secret. But all that stuff where those people are against us, just add the NBA to that. The NBA.
Yeah, that's just indoctrination.
But here, let me get to answer your question. So, do you fire Fertitta? I mean, do you fire Maury? Obviously not. But the Chinese asked it, what if it had been done? Okay, everybody would have been, it would have been a bloated democracy and stuff like that. Are Americans, because the Costa Ricans are not, in order to answer your questions, are Americans willing to die for those ideals?
Yes.
I hope that.
Now let me interrupt them.
That doesn't account. I don't think that's the case for every American, but you go.
Let me put a caveat in that. Yes, until it hits their pocketbook, and then they're willing to go kill people because you motherfuckers just took money out of my house, and for that I will kill you. And that's why I say, and I said from the jump, from the beginning of this, that this is literally the beginning of what we could see. A simple thing as an NBA tweet could be the beginning of an actual World War III situation. And I'm not talking about, we go into a trade war and we have tariffs, which are taxes and all that stuff. I'm talking about full-on, full-scale, aggressive, all-out war where nobody wins, and I mean, millions and millions of people can die from this. And they've got 1.5 billion people at least that will die no matter what. If you haven't seen the movie To Live, It's an old Chinese movie from the early 90s. That tells you everything you need to know about China and war. It is an absolute masterpiece. It's called To Live. You have to sub, unless you speak Mandarin, you have to be able to actually read the subtitles. But it's a brilliant film from probably 94 to 96, somewhere in there. I strongly recommend you see that so that you can get a real idea of what China has gone through and their progression from World War II until now. Because I think what people don't understand is that China in World War II, China was, they got beat up by the Japanese, Miguel. The Japanese took Mongolia over completely. And the United States took Mongolia back and gave it back to the Chinese, which is, you look at it now and you go, why in the hell would we do that? But people don't understand that war is such a complicated, intricate process that getting there starts with President Trump saying, this is a bad deal for us, and we're going to start putting tariffs on all of your stuff, the way you tariff our stuff. And the Chinese go ahead.
They didn't like it. And there have been businesses, as Huawei has suffered, and had to do changes. But here's the part of it that, the thing is I don't know that Trump is necessarily wrong.
I don't think so either.
That the reaction, the fact is here's what you have to judge is how genuine is China on that they're not aggressive and they're not trying to take over the world. Because if you do think, or at the very least, they're still into that competition of if the United States and Russia were, 1 and 2 during, war, the Cold War, and then Russia sort of fell. So you got, America is the only superpower. Well, guess what? We're a superpower too. How are they living that? They're living that down to every 2 billion. They live and breathe that competition. America stopped that competition. We sat it out. The Cold War continued for everybody except us. We were like, all right, we won. We didn't win crap. All there was, and you know what? The chance to win was there, but we had to be impressive and lead from there with democracy, show how it works, and not make it, farcical, like it has been in some of these countries and stuff.
And we wound up going to the Middle East and fighting for oil and pretending we were nation building.
Ask Iraqis how good democracy is.
Yeah.
The Ukraine, ask them. The Ukraine, the Ukraine to me is an advanced society, right? It's like Russia, similar language and stuff like that, but they're also sort of bitter rivals. And there we are, sort of fomenting that, And to me, how is the Ukraine adjusted to democracy? Well, the guy who's president, you know what his credentials were, right?
No.
You're gonna love this. This could only happen, in this 21st century now.
Right.
He played the president in a sitcom.
He was a reality show?
No. I think it was a sitcom, not a reality show, but just a sitcom.
Same thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's unbelievable. But there's still, but at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, the language is the same. They're more Russian than Western.
Sure.
We're trying to tear that apart and be in the middle of that. So like when we do stuff like that, the handling of the Ukraine and stuff like that. Again, so what happened when Vladimir Putin got a chance? He does what China's doing with the NBA now. Stick it to the States. So by chance, there's a very nice area of the Ukraine called the Crimea, where, for example, like old Russian literature, the Tsars vacation there, and it's known as beautiful territory and stuff. And there's a lot of Russians there. So Russia took it from the Ukraine. And there's still sort of like soldiers and mercenaries and skirmishes fighting on that border. It hasn't even stopped. But they took it on the basis of they're there to protect Russians, ethnic Russians. From who? From Ukrainians? It's like practically the same thing. So they took over land again, and all of that is because the Ukraine turns around and goes, "Hey, aren't we in NATO? Shouldn't we be? Or don't we want to be in? Isn't NATO backing us anymore? We just had territory taken, and we did nothing. So they poked us again. The NBA is another poke. Iran, pokey, pokey, pokey.
Yep. Okay, so to kind of sum up the first part of this, then here's my impression. You tell me where I'm right and wrong. The Trump administration comes in and they say, we're no longer going to cow down to bad deals and bullshit. They pull us out of the worst thing they could have done, the Paris Climate Change Accord, which is sickening to me. When you look back at what the Montreal Accord did and everything it accomplished, the Paris Accord could have done 100 times what the Montreal Accord did for climate and for the environment. So that was, I know it's unrelated sort of, but it showed that we had an active administration who was willing to throw everything that we had worked for at least 2 generations and just throw it out and say, screw it, we're starting over. We don't like how things are going, and we're the baddest people in the world. We're the #1 economy in the world. We're the richest people in the world. And you will do what we say, or we will fucking bomb you, right? So from there, then he polls the Trump administration, whomever may be in charge of that, I don't even know. They poll the idea that we're going to lower taxes for the rich and we're going to bring jobs back into the United States. And all that did was drove more jobs out. And that didn't work at all. And actually, it's harmed us. The UAW is on strike. Jobs are lost. So then the Trump administration says, and the third thing we're going to do, because our economy is so great right now that we can do it, and we can convince people that it's the right thing to do, because they just drastically cut taxes, which always has a bull market, and then it becomes a bear market. That's every time. So because of that, when it's all said and done, he says to Xi Jinping, you're not going to get away with the tariffs and the trade agreements that we had any longer. We're not doing that anymore. That deal is done. Not only does he do that, he pulls us out of the Iran deal, which was about peace and trying to stabilize the Middle East. And so now Israel's a nervous wreck. They have nukes. Iran's a nervous wreck. They have nukes. China's a nervous wreck. They have nukes, which, because they're stuck between them, India has nukes, and they're a nervous wreck, and we have nukes. So you've got nuclear assault all around you. You have, at a minimum, you have boots on the ground coming, because here's the difference. When Chinamen starve, they don't have a say-so in it. When my dad loses his farm, and when Huffers lose their farm down here, and Harnesses and everybody else all around me lose their farms, that's been in their homes and their families for generations, and they lose them, and they're small farms, okay? Even though they seem big around here, they're very, very small in comparison to the Western Midwest. You get into Iowa and stuff like in Idaho, and the farms are, 20,000 acres of farms. Okay. And those people are going bankrupt too. I watched the thing today on Land O'Lakes, and they're trying to figure out, how do we keep dairy farmers, which we went from 5,300 dairy farmers to 3,500 dairy farmers this year alone. how do we keep them alive? How do we keep these generational things going? And more important than anything else, how do we afford to eat? Because we can only do welfare for food for so long. Now we can give welfare to people all day long because that brings back $1 for every dollar. But when we can't grow our own food and sell it, then everything goes wrong. So our entire economy in a roundabout way is based strictly on agriculture. And it always has been, and it always will be. I mean, agriculture is the thing that created civilization in the first place. Would you agree with that?
Sure.
Okay, so now that all this is happening, China says, you know what? That's fine. We're going to buy our soybeans from Argentina. We're going to buy our corn from Brazil. We're going to buy our coffee from Costa Rica. We're going to buy our chocolate from Colombia. And they open up an incredibly huge market that, by the way, they've been predicting they were going to do all along. Because like you said earlier in this conversation, I think before we actually went on record, that they've actually been nation building in Africa for a generation now. Hey, we're going to build roads. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to bring real civilization to this nation, to this continent. And by the way, the Americans are fighting over oil in the sand in the Middle East. So, and I don't mean to put down the efforts of any troops. I don't mean anything like that. And I'm not picking sides here and saying that Obama or Clinton or Reagan or Trump have all done any better at that. They've all screwed it up completely. That's been a botched job. And we've been at war with Afghanistan now for 20 years. And nobody even knows we're at war anymore. It's like it just doesn't even exist. So what happens, Miguel? Final thoughts on this. We're running an hour here. So there's my tangent. Tell me where I'm right and wrong. Tell me what happens next. Worst case scenario, best case scenario.
Well, with China, the NBA stuff, I think will probably, there'll be other signs and other steps in that direction. But I do think that it's a sign of it going aggressive. The NBA, I think in this case reacted well. They're going to lose business, but they're already, taking in some money and stuff like that. So their bottom line, they'll take a bottom line finish, but I don't think there'll be any richer or poorer for it. You know what I mean? In the long run. So because of that, it becomes a move that'll probably just be an asterisk. But I think that the intent very clearly shows some danger, because the bottom line is if Maury had been fired, or if we were in a country where Maury had been fired, those countries have a tendency to also have the population grumble, hate it, but also carry on and move on and let things go on.
Yeah.
Now, is that really was Daryl Morey's job going to be the thing that set off World War? It should be, just from a purely philosophical perspective. What our Constitution says is that we can express our opinions here. Now, China doesn't give a rat's ass about our Constitution and stuff, nope. But it is just if China had ignored it, we would be moving on in there. But China chose to make it a point, right? So this is the thing that worries me, though. Worst case scenario. You mentioned Iran and Israel and stuff like that. Iran is another country that is pushing the envelope and is prodding and stuff like that. And you're right, they involve Israel there, so you've got a real X factor that could go hot there quickly. Trump also chose to take them on as an adversary too, with a few of the things, and they've also backed off there on a couple of situations. Iranians seized a British oil carrier, and I don't know, if they had tried that about 15 years ago, they would have gotten a whole bunch of aircraft carriers in the neighborhood, probably one British and 4 American ones, but they kind of we're negotiating, and we didn't look tough on that one. And it's not that we have to look tough, but we do. We say we like to look tough, right? So, Iran could keep prodding, Russia could keep prodding, Turkey could become a problem. And we've got an idiot president that, he threatened Turkey's economy recently. He said, we could mess it up again, like like they've done before. Yeah, I grant that we could mess things up for a lot of people, but now everybody reacting against us, reacting in that type of aggression and say, okay, don't buy America and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and that sort of stuff. All of a sudden, now you're facing a lot of different fronts. When it was the USSR, there was the idea of how do you invade? What do you do there? And what they had was the concept of like open up an 8-front war on them, hit them from Finland, hit them from the middle of Europe, hit them from Turkey, hit them from Japan, hit them from India, from and just we're now susceptible to that, because we're pulling soldiers out of Syria, and Turkey already attacked the Kurds who were under our protection.
Yep.
So now there's another resentful former friend who's going to be like, those guys, the Americans aren't worth their word, So it's like
they let us down.
Yes, and I think that's the worry here is we continue to operate from a position of power that we no longer have, and so let's say something happens with nuclear bombs in Iran, and Israel sends in a squad of fighter planes that blows up their reactor, and Iran attacks, and Saudi Arabia doesn't like Iran, so those are big militaries that are starting to warm up and play, right? So now we could sit back and leave it, You might be in a situation there where Saudi Arabia and Israel might be fighting Iran together, as crazy as that might sound, but that could happen, right? Or Israel could be alone and need help. Again, what if we have to commit troops back into the Middle East to straighten things out, or to protect against an even more aggressive Iran, or a skirmish between Iran and Israel? Guess what? If I were China, then what I would do is I would, move more troops and move more into the islands that they're taking over, building aircraft, because the Chinese and the Filipinos also claim those islands, and their president is a nut job on a whole different level.
Oh.
He's threatened to send suicide squads to attack China, even though they're also big trade partners and stuff. But he doesn't really care. So you got a lot of X factors there, and we can't be the little boy with the finger in the dam. We can't tend to every spot. So that's why Iran and all those, very dangerous, because all we need is one more hotspot, and we're crippled. We can't help or go do some of the other things that may be more important, maybe called on to do.
I don't have any argument with that. My only hope in this is, at this point, I think we have to have a very strong Democrat that gets elected. I think we need to be able to take Congress, and as long as we have that, we can start to renegotiate trade agreements with China, and we can do it on a friendly level, and we can cool all this stuff off. Iran, that's not cooling off anytime soon, no matter what we do. I personally don't think China's cooling off anytime soon, no matter what we do, because we blinked, and if we blink again, they've got us, and they know it. And they know it now, because we had to do buyouts, and they don't do buyouts. They go, oh, your company's bad? Who cares? We'll build another one. We're bailing people out on a personal level. China's not ever going to do that. And so when you look at it in that framework, and you understand how badly this administration has handled the entire global economy, with the idea that we're going to go in and run it like, our chest puffed out and, fuck you, we're Americans and we're going to do it all. Our candle in the wind has got a whole lot of wind on it, and it's barely staying lit. And I've got a feeling that, and I've been saying this for 3 years now, that if we don't get a grip on this right now, that we're going to be in a war that we can't win. And we may actually be speaking Mandarin in the next generation. That's pretty scary, huh?
Yeah, and like I said, the 2 billion people, they're in Africa, they're all over, here and stuff, and they're a minority in every country, and we've got an Asian man running for president in the States, and that's the diversification and the greatness of our country, right? I actually think he's, been a reasonable contributor, at least to the race, maybe
certainly
a different voice and stuff like that. But you're in a situation where that could also lead to distrust and even be more of a divisive thing for us. It just depends, where the next blow comes from, that people step up and get in our faces. But we've been getting to that point, And then again, maybe it's Turkey, because Turkey's a NATO, full signed, full-fledged, but you couldn't talk about anything, people more different culturally, historically, and things like that. The NATO thing was purely a World War II convenience. And what you have to look at since then, is even Trump has said it, what are we defending over there? It's like, it is an older treaty that if you're not with the philosophy is the key to it. So that's the problem to it. Now you got a president who doesn't even get the philosophy. He doesn't even understand the unity or the brotherhood that that is required among the nations of NATO. And he spits in the face of it, weakening it. It's like we keep weakening on our end, and everybody else seems to be getting stronger.
Yeah, so finally, just to wrap this up, on our final thoughts on this. So what do you think is a reasonable outcome for the next, let's just call it 30 days? What do you think is going to happen in the next 30 days?
With the NBA or in general?
With it in general. I mean, it all, because the NBA is really just an example of the greater process that's happening right now. And I want to ask you this too. Was Trump right in saying that, you know what, we're going to become isolationists? We'll do everything right here. We've got enough to deal with it. We've got a huge economy, and our economy will stay huge, and people will sell us shit because they want our money. That's what he believes. He believes our economy is going to pull us through this no matter what. Do you believe that? And number two, what do you think happens in the next 30 days globally? And we'll wrap it up on that.
Well, really fast here. I mean, the American way is the American way, and Trump is calling on a bunch of cliches that if they're still good, we should be okay, right? I mean, we can go through some hard times. We, as a people, we've been resilient, and we may be facing another one of those. I think, there are a few things that we do have to look at. A little bit is the individuality and stuff like that. We do have to have more of a group mentality as Americans. At the end of the day, racism and things like that, we do have to continue down a path of resolving some of those things and getting back to where we see ourselves as Americans first, and not just someone, well, I'm not an American, or I'm not that individualism has been taken to the point where it's very detrimental to our country, and many other countries, in fact, most, if not all, don't have that same mentality as us, right? So if they're all thinking aggressively, what can we do that's good for Iran, or this, that, the other stuff, then you're facing an adversary that's playing by different rules, right? So we do need that. Now, in terms of the 30 days, I think this becomes a glacial thing, and 30 days mean nothing may happen. But behind the scenes, the momentum, as you pointed out, is already, we're already heading towards that. It almost seems inevitable, right? What will be interesting to see is if at some point that inertia is slowed down by anything, some Iranian child is brought to the United States for an operation, and everybody, has a day where we're celebrating and I don't know what it could be, but it's going to take more than that, right? You know what I mean? And that's what I
Yeah,
think. In 30 days, something critical could happen. I think Iran is the most dangerous. I think I think
definitely.
I think China. The thing is if and I'm just an amateur. I'm an analyst because I say I am and stuff like that. But just as an observer, if I were China, anything goes in this war except the full-on declaration of hot war. Yeah, they have a fancy new military that they may be itching to try out, and that could be a problem, right? But I think they win this hands down if they don't allow the militaries to get involved, and it becomes all economic, take us on all fronts, win over our friends, let us continue not looking impressive and stuff like that. And you tell me how it's going to go when it gets to a situation where things are hot and there's a war. We're in the ball game at that point. You can't really discount our military. But anything short of that, I think China's way ahead already. So,
I agree.
that's what I think is dangerous. And with this president, you know, that could be the thing in the next 30 days, how ugly the impeachment thing gets and
Yeah.
how he reacts, because he could take this down a path where it gets really disgusting and ugly and everybody's just embarrassed and puts their head down. So
Well, and let's not forget that anytime you want to become a second term president, if you can have a war, you're almost assured to be a second term president.
yeah, in this case, the opposite effect will hopefully be over there. But
Yeah, let's hope. But
that's the weird part about it. At the end of the day, I think Trump's a businessman, and war is a kind of thing like for backing off on Iran. I mean, Iran actually, I believe, shot down a drone, or there was talk of real problems with Iran. They sort of, I think, played it a little cool on, and to me, I think that his instinct isn't really to go to war first. So, another good example of that is if you really wanted war, I don't think firing Michael, is it Michael Bolton? What's Bolton's name? I know Michael Bolton's a singer, but the advisor, is it Ken?
yeah.
That Bolton character. I'm sorry.
Bolton, yeah.
But you wouldn't fire him, maybe.
Yeah, because he's a warmonger if ever there was one.
Yeah, you keep him around in some role, even if he was distasteful in other things and stuff. So he's shown me like he really doesn't know what he's doing because he sends mixed messages that way. But to me, I think he's a big talker to the brink of war, and then when it comes down to pulling the trigger, I'm worried.
With that, we're gonna let it go. We went way over. So don't forget to hit subscribe, like, all that good stuff. We'd love to hear your comments on this and just see what you think about this outside the cage, the NBA, China, the economy, the oncoming World War III process that may be or may not be happening in the background. And Miguel, I really appreciate all of your insight into this. It's helped me out a lot. And this is something that we as Americans, I don't think we're processing nearly enough. At least 50% of us aren't, and 50% of us are maybe processing it too much. I'm not sure. Maybe there's a happy medium in there. I don't know, but it sure looks ugly from where I'm standing, and I don't see a resolution in sight if things don't go right in November for our country. So until next time, this is the CRP. I'm Chad Lack. He's Miguel Iterati. Thank you for stopping by. Namaste.
Hey, thank you, Chad. And everybody, like he said, hit like and subscribe. There's a little bit of a new subject for us. So definitely, if there are any opinions or anything on there, we'd love to chat about it and, become more educated. So thanks a lot to all the CRP folks out there.
Thank you so much. We'll see you again.